Hey there. So there's this Italian restaurant in my neighborhood in North Park, San Diego called Siamo Napoli. I've been going there for years. The restaurant's decorated with all sorts of memorabilia from the owner's family home in Italy. In the back, there's a room with an entire wall that's covered with a photo mural of the Bay of Naples. Another wall is covered with a huge black and white photo of a young and glamorous Sophia Loren. The place is run by three brothers, Flavio, Giovanni, and Salvador. On weekend nights, the place is jam-packed, yet the guys always make it a point to chat with all the guests. A few years ago, we took our mom there to celebrate her 93rd birthday. We thought it would be fun because her parents came to the U.S. from Italy. Flavio and his brothers, they charmed her, showered her with all sorts of compliments, telling her how young she looks, and she's eating it all up. She was so happy. My mom has since passed away, and I'll never forget how special they made her feel.
What'd you say? Heard. I got that, don't worry.
Okay.
Heard, chef, got 20 chicken all day.
I keep saying this, and I will keep saying it. Restaurants fulfill this vital role in society. And it's not really about the food. Honestly, it's about the way they welcome us, the way they nurture us, the way they nourish our bellies and our souls. And just like that Italian mama, you and I both know when something just feels right. I'm Ryan King, and for the past 15 years, I've been writing about the restaurant world. I've met hundreds of amazing chefs and got to know just how passionate, driven, and creative they really are. But I've also got to know what worries them, those conversations that they have together in the dark corner of a bar after service. Like it or not, the industry and the people who drive it are struggling.
Restaurants are hard, right? Financially, they could be breaking or just emotionally draining.
You're in an inherently more physical situation than in a lot of other industries, and that translates to higher stress levels.
I was stressed drinking, I was stressed eating.
I can't tell you how many times I worked in kitchens and the person next to me was so angry. And you were just like, I can't have you next to me with the knife. I'm a little scared.
We need to talk about and try to tackle some of the toxic aspects that exist in kitchen culture today. We need to highlight some of these structural problems that impact the well-being of people who work in this industry. There is a mental health crisis in hospitality. Over half of chefs say they've suffered from depression in their careers. How to hire, maintain, and retain staff is an ongoing struggle.
New York had lost a lot of cooks. Cooks were going to other cities.
I'm very grateful for my staff, but it does feel like it's not heading in a direction for the better of the industry.
Most of the people that I have lost at Field Trip were because of mental health. They needed to go because they were dealing with X. And if I still had a lot of those people, we'd be a stronger company.
And why do I care so much about this? Well, restaurants are not just about the food on the plate. They're actually much more about creating a space where we have the chance to offload what's on our plates. They're intrinsic to our well-being. Sociologists talk about something called the third place. This is a space where you go to connect with people that's away from home and away from work. In these times of self-service checkouts, the insular walls of social media, ordering all our food online, no longer knowing our neighbours, where better to do that than around a restaurant table? In this series, you'll hear from experts who can offer advice, inspiration, and new ideas on how to tackle some of the issues that are plaguing kitchen culture today. This is Heard. Kitchens are high-pressure environments, physically and mentally. But what if we took a scientist who knows about the relationship between the physical and mental pressures, a scientist who knows how to protect your body against chronic stress, and we asked them to apply their expertise to the kitchen?
I'm a physiologist by background. No one knows what a physiologist is, so don't worry about that.
Enter Ollie Patrick.
Physiologists generally work to improve how well the human machine works. So you normally find physiologists in two camps, either elite sports performance, or you find them in hospitals rehabilitating people after they've had a heart attack or some kind of breathing disorder.
I wanted to speak to Ollie about the impact of working in kitchens, because he knows what you can do if your environment is causing you stress. This is a guy that really knows his shit. He can measure what's happening in your mind and your body to a really extreme degree.
So my background is in delivering health screening, proactive health assessments for 25 years, ranging from the sort of general annual MOT people used to go through with some bloods and a doctor's check, and then me running some tests on them to see how fit they were, up to co-constructing the world's most advanced health assessment. So I delivered the world's most expensive advanced health assessment where I looked after global high net worth individuals. They wanted to make sure they didn't die.
I'm a mad hypochondriac, by the way.
Well, this is only going to feed you. I'm going to feed that hypochondriac with it.
I've got an MRI this afternoon.
Oh, fantastic. Well, listen, let's log in after that.
Ollie's also conducted some fascinating research using high-tech medical devices worn by chefs in kitchens. And the results, well, they're going to shock you. I know that they certainly shocked me.
We have an inadequate physiological recovery crisis across hospitality that isn't a crisis for younger people, but it is if you don't adapt to that in later years.
So what does paying for the world's most expensive health assessment actually get you?
So I've run everything known to mankind in terms of physical testing on human beings. And what's interesting about that is you come back to most of those tests are just reflecting how that person leads their life. If you don't sleep, I'll see it in the data. If you don't eat well, I'll see it in the data. If you don't like yourself, I'll see it in the data. If you don't move, I'll see it in the data. So you hear about that person who developed a cancer or suddenly had a heart attack. As we sit here now, could there be something wrong with you that neither of us are aware of? Were there physiological or signs in their bloods or imaging or scanning that would have found that much earlier and meant it didn't cause them to die or didn't cause them as much of a problem? So I've become a very strong advocate of how we lead our lives, because in many cases, medicine's just measuring the impact of your lifestyle and treating the symptom rather than getting back to the way we lead our lives being the defining feature of how long we'll live, how well we'll live. And it's been misunderstood, I think, grossly globally.
You said then if you don't like yourself, I'll see it in the data.
Yeah.
What data would you use to see that? What indicators would give you that assumption about somebody's life?
When we look at psychological health, there are 10 evidence-based factors that affect that. And one of them would be self-compassion, for example. So an absence of self-compassion will be an increased likelihood of poor psychological health. Now, how will I measure that? Through questionnaire, obviously. But we also used to take markers of neurotransmitters. So the neurotransmitters of happiness being serotonin, but also dopamine. And you'd find, again, reduced levels of those because there's less thoughts going in that would incentivize those neurotransmitters to exist. If someone had a very poor self-worth, you'd start to see potential changes in their gut. You would see they'd be less able to prioritize self-care behaviors. So I can't go to the gym because I've got to take my grandmother to the shops. I can't take time to cook a healthy meal because I've got to phone that friend who's in discomfort. Always putting others before you will be not just a pure physiological piece, but it will also be a behavior piece. So there comes a point where you look at well-being strategy and go, you've got to find ways and means to be kind to yourself, to not necessarily to love yourself, but to show compassion to yourself. And if you don't do that, we'll see it in some of the chemical data, but we'll also see it in the behaviors that you fail to adhere to because you haven't put yourself up there.
Nuts, right? Ollie can actually do a test that tells you if you don't like yourself. You're going to hear more about these tests and specifically the tests that Ollie did on chefs coming up. But before that, I think you would agree that it's fair to say people who work in kitchens could do with a little bit more well-being. So let's take a deep dive into one of the biggest well-being killers there is.
Stress, when mismanaged, will deteriorate every key thing that affects how well your body works. And management of stress sits at the heart of any well-being, health, longevity, whatever you want program. If you do not get that under control, you will pay the price.
So for someone like me who's coming at this from a layman perspective,
Yeah.
what is stress? Where does it come from your perspective?
We have to start with the idea stress is extremely good for us. So stress has got a negative connotation, and people go, oh, stress is fight or flight. It's your body's reaction to when you get attacked by a bear. Now, the body is genius, but it hasn't really had any meaningful evolution for thousands of years. I haven't been attacked by a bear today, and I can still be pretty stressed. So I think we need to go back a step and recognize humans thrive under pressure. But when pressures become too much, then that pressure becomes negative. And that's what we're often talking about with stress. The nervous system that gets me ready for stress is called the sympathetic nervous system. And when my body perceives a threat, all the internal systems in my body get ready to deal with that threat. So if you started giving me grief now, Ryan, my heart rate would go up. I'd release more sugar into my bloodstream. My blood pressure would go up. And my body doesn't know we're having a verbal argument. It always prepares for some kind of physical expression of that. So any perceived threat or arousal, I accelerate my physiology. So when pressures overwhelm us, the body always believes that to be some kind of physical threat. Always. So if I'm running a busy day today, I've got to get my kids to school, got to get lunches ready, then an email comes in, the phone call comes in. These are all little pressures. Now, none of these per se individually are huge. They're just these micro pressures build up until they slightly overwhelm me. And then my body is anticipating a physical threat. And that physical threat means my body is internally ready to deal with danger. That's what's going on. People think stress are big moments, a divorce, a bereavement, etc. These big bombastic moments. And you might look at your life and go, I feel really tired. I feel really wound up, but nothing big's happening to me. Nothing disastrous is happening. But the volume of pressures on that individual has slightly overwhelmed their ability to cope or to share or to distribute them. And their physiology is ready for a threat that isn't coming. When we look at the kitchen, you'll see an awful lot of that in practice.
This reminds me of lots of conversations I have with chefs.
There's this 2 to 4 hour window every night where there's just an extreme amount of pressure, where you're just surrounded by all this noise and knives and fire and things that are hurting you and etc.
A constant feeling of threat.
I mean, it's sort of like going to war, but without fearing that you're going to die.
It's just never far away.
I never forget the yeah, I'll never forget the machine. That thing just rumbles in your head all night long, every day, all day.
I can't imagine working like this every single day.
There were guys and girls in my kitchen that were addicts, and they would blame it on the stress of the people pushing to get the food out fast enough, to make sure it was hot, making sure it tastes good.
So like Ollie says, when your body detects a threat, whether that's a threat or not, if it detects one, it revs up the sympathetic nervous system. But as humans, we also have another system we can utilize to help calm us back down. And you're gonna love the name of this one.
When I first started measuring stress, I thought I'd find senior executives or people working in top level kitchens would be super stressed. Not so. What we found is they're super inadequately recovered. And the nervous system that does that is called the parasympathetic, or rest and digest. When I slow down heart rate, move blood out of my muscles now into my stomach, I produce digestive secretions that help me break down food and break it all down. And I love the fact it's called rest and digest, because it goes to show how intertwined digestion and eating is with relaxation and recovery.
Rest and digest. Perfect, right? The industry that's all about getting diners to sit back, relax, rest and digest. How about we turn that round a little and we help kitchen teams do the same?
Chef?
Heard.
So what actually happens to your body when you're under this threat, when you're like experiencing stress constantly and you're not getting this time you need to rest and digest?
When I first started trying to measure stress, as I was told, it was very subjective. It's all very psychological. But we've known since the 1930s that if you make people overwhelmed too often, they get stomach ulcers. They get a gland in their neck wastes away. Their adrenal gland, which is something that sits on top of your kidneys, gets too big. And stress doesn't sit in your brain. Stress very quickly turns into patterns of dysfunction because their body is on a low grade level, always waiting for the next thing. There's a good journal of medicine called The Lancet, and it described the environment we live in as anxiogenic, which means the environment is trying to make me worried, anxiety generating. So what does that mean? It means that at any given moment, there's a million devices competing for my attention. I'm connected to a supercomputer that's telling me about a child being killed on the other side of the world. I've got every relative or connection that I've ever made at any point in my life still able to directly interface with me with no filter. I am under a level of stimulus that has never existed in human history before. And I add all that together, and what we're getting is physiology is increasingly unable to disengage and believe that there's no threat coming.
When we don't manage this stress, how does that manifest? What impacts can that have on my body?
Just the first thing there is you've had inadequate energy restoration, right? So you've disabled the process by which you run your immune system. What's the repercussion of that? Well, you're the one who gets the bug that goes around the office or around the kitchen. You're the one who it takes 10 days, not 5 days to get over it. So your first piece is immunity, right? So immunity is often people's tell. I get every bug that goes around in winter and it stays twice as long because your immune system needs to pull on the energy from that restoration. Energy itself is still your best barometer. Do I wake up tired? Do I wake up full of beans? After half an hour, am I full of beans? How do I exist without a coffee in the morning? What's my mid-afternoon energy like? What's my appetite to go and be physically active like? Or am I just running exhausted? So physical energy. But also if you've got low recovery, you'd see low emotional energy. I cannot be asked to call my mum. Cannot be asked to call that person that I know I need to call because I haven't got the energy to expend it. So I'm seeing that energy affect my emotional relationships. Mental energy, brain fog, that will be most commonly affecting strategic thinking. When my body's ready for a threat, it's not planning 2 years in advance. It's not doing executive function where it's thinking about the first thing for the second thing, but it becomes very simple tasks. Other tasks feel overwhelming. So if I can't see big picture, that's also a good sign that I'm running low on energy. And sort of spiritual energy. What's the point in being here? I lost a bit of verve. What's my purpose? Am I contributing? And I feel like I'm leading a life that's worth living. So you don't have to wake up being tired to be fatigued. You might be someone who's not ringing people, not exploring new opportunities, not learning, not thinking strategically, not going for big picture and contribution. And that also is a sign that you're not pulling that together. And the other bit, we all have a thing that we can go, when I'm run down, that flares, then reacting to that and saying, right, how do I build in now more structured pathways that put me into that place of recovery? That's how you've got to take those first early signs and make a change, not wait for the thing to get so catastrophic that you're forced to make a change. And that is unfortunately cold, hard reality. I've sat with people where they've been diagnosed with a cancer, they've developed a type 2 diabetes, they've got early onset dementia, and they sit there and they go, right, let's do it. Send me to the clinic in Cuba for the stem cells. Let's do everything. I'll live with a personal trainer. I'll get the nutritionist in. They should have done it 20 years earlier. Your body's a machine. It doesn't know you're a chef, doesn't know you run a kitchen, doesn't know anything. It knows what it gets and it knows what it doesn't get. And if you're getting that balance wrong, the onus is squarely on you to correct that balance as effectively as you can with the constraints of the real world you live in.
Fascinating. Also, you surprised me at the beginning where some stress is good. I didn't expect that. It's a bit of a curveball, but now I'm thinking, how do I balance that? How do I know when stress has ticked past the point of being good? How do I understand that equilibrium where I'm utilizing the benefits of stress,
yes,
but I'm not pushing it too far where I'm not being able to rest and recover correctly?
Yeah, it's a lifelong battle, that, Brian, truth be told, because truth is growth comes from when that stress is slightly too much. If I go to the gym and I lift a weight I can lift, I don't get stronger. I have to lift a weight I can't quite lift. And then my body goes, right, what was the reason you couldn't lift that weight? I'll increase your capacity. If you take a job you can't quite do, you grow into it. You take a relationship that feels a little bit of a stretch, you grow into it. So the journey of human development is to do things that do take us slightly over that tipping point and then believe that we'll grow as a result of that. We need that stimulus. We need that drive because that's where we get energy and growth from. How do I know I'm getting it right? It's, again, iterative. But if you are seeing decreasing performance or decreasing energy, then those are two very quick barometers. So we have the exact same relationship in sports performance. And interestingly, some of the hardware that's come out in the last 4 or 5 years is actually measuring exactly what I'm talking about. So there's a device called Whoop. There's a device called Aura. They're measuring something called heart rate variability, which is very simply measuring those two nervous systems I talked about, whether you're spending too much time ready for threat and inadequate time recovering energy. And they sold that to the fit community because fit people are always wondering whether they're doing too much. And they like to microanalyze everything and sit around in juice bars talking about their data. Now, the people who should be wearing that are chefs. The people who should be wearing that are people working in jobs that push you close to the edge, and sometimes you go too far. The original Whoop was herpes. You get a cold sore when you are run down. So you can get a Whoop or an aura, or you can get herpes, but it does the same thing. It's an early warning sign. And actually, everyone's got their tell, right? So you go to someone when they're run down, it always goes to my chest, or I can't control my eczema. Stress doesn't cause these problems. What stress does is when you have inadequate energy restoration, you can't keep your issue under control. So, my cold sore's popped up, I can put a cream on it that takes it away. My skin's flaring, I'll take a steroid cream. My guts are bad, I'll take an antacid. These are all your body's genius feedback loops to go, Ryan, you're doing something wrong. And I'm warning you now before it turns into something really wrong. And yet you'll go to your local pharmacist and they'll give you 22 ways of killing that signal. And the biggest single signal that it tells us is fatigue. And we've been told that fatigue is normal and that hypercaffeinating to offset that fatigue is normal too. So if I walked through my train station in the morning and everyone was taking painkillers, I'd go, why is everyone in pain? That seems weird. But everyone's taking a fatigue alleviant. Everyone's walking through with a coffee cup. So we are in a really difficult time to disengage, a really difficult environment to activate that recovery nervous system. But your body doesn't give a crap what you do. It knows what it gets and what it doesn't get. Then I've got to work out how do I build more time in that recovery nervous system, despite the fact my job's tricky as you like, despite the fact my job's gone full crazy, my relationships are causing chaos. I can't change the world, but can I build in more recovery? And in that, this is why you've seen the massive rise in things like cold water therapy and cold water immersion, meditation, low and no alcohol solutions, because these are all ways of inducing that physiological state of calm, despite the world being an absolute, madness.
Ollie blows my mind, and I just wish I could afford to have him constantly monitoring and tracking my body. And once you actually start to understand how your nervous systems work, it does actually start to feel a bit easier to manage. But the odds are stacked against people who work in kitchens. So what are the solutions for you? Coming up, you're going to hear Ollie's tips on how to recover from high-pressure environments and what he actually discovered when he turned some of his high-tech machinery towards kitchens and wired up chefs.
Heard, Chef.
Chef Heard.
Thanks for listening to Heard, the podcast that aims to put the rest in restaurants. This episode is sponsored thanks to San Pellegrino and Accor, two brands that care passionately about the restaurant industry.
Heard, yeah, I got that, don't worry.
Are there obvious solutions? Not these quick fixes that you mentioned where I go to the pharmacist and get this quick fix, but what are the solutions? What are the ways to rebalance?
So the only true stresses to human physiology are heat, noise, which is relevant for a kitchen, heat, noise, load, because my body under those situations, if I heat you up, your body gets ready for stress. If I make a continual noise, like set off a fire alarm, your body gets ready for stress. If I give you some heavy weights to hold, you get ready for stress. Every other stress is what you think is about to happen. Everyone all the time, Ryan, is running the inside of their body depending on what they think is about to happen next. So a good example of that, I used to have a fear of flying, and fear and stress interlinked, but not exactly the same. So I'm sat on an airplane with the person next to me who's also sat on an airplane. We're both flying to Spain, but my palms are sweaty, my mouth's dry, my heart's racing, I've got sugar in my bloodstream. I feel like I'm going to throw up or throw a punch. But we're both on an aeroplane, right? So the stress isn't the flying. The stress is that I believe the plane's going to crash, and my physiology is living in the state of the plane crash, not in the state of the plane journey. So I am in a state physiologically based on purely what I believe is about to happen next, if that makes sense. Now, if I don't believe that plane's going to crash, then my physiology will look like the guy who's sipping on margaritas and got his Panama hat on. So how many stresses are real versus how many are projected is a really important point, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's why lots of techniques that work are about being in the present. And this is why we've partly seen a rise of things like meditation, which naturally calm the volume of stresses you look for. Right? So meditation isn't some Eastern hippie Buddhist thing. It's a very real way of calming down your brain from looking for stresses that don't exist, because very few stresses are real. That's why simple stuff like getting out into nature, feet on the floor. There's this thing called biophilia, which is this something around green and the patterns in nature, these things called fractals, which are a very different pattern to a tree and leaves than there is to a building and concrete, that naturally also induces that calm nervous system. So if I'm doing some meditation out in nature with my feet on the floor, it's a pathway, not of fluffy stuff. This is hardcore, get my head out of projected stress into a present happiness. So that also brings us to talking therapies, sharing, how many problems don't exist until we call them out loud. And unequivocally, from a mental health perspective, and coming back to that third place piece, sharing is intervention number one. And I don't care who you share it with, therapist, mate, dog, whatever. But the saying of these problems out loud immediately diminishes the power of them. It's not necessarily that the mate is going to come up with a great solution. You don't have to be a therapist. The act of sharing calls it out. You're like, oh God, this plane isn't going to crash, is it? So therapy, sharing, meditation, nature, that's a big piece.
And what about exercise, Ollie? Where does that fit into this?
When you're in the fire, exercise is another stress. And what we need is that fire to be cooled, which is low intensity work. So what we often call zone 2, where you can have a nice conversation, you can have a chat. It's social, bike ride with a friend, going for a fast walk, light jog, rowing, swimming, but easy. That is manna from heaven when it comes to down-regulating the physiology of stress. Breathing is the other easiest one in the world. And it sounds, again, hippie. But when I'm nervous and ready for threat, I breathe shallowly from my chest. When I'm calm and chilling, I breathe deeper from my belly. So what's interesting about that is I can actually change the way I think by changing the way I breathe.
This is hard, cutting-edge, data-driven, practical advice. This is not sit around a campfire, kumbaya, bells and smells time. This is real, applicable science. Okay, to recap, breathing, therapy, light exercise. We've got some real advice, but brace yourselves, because when it comes to managing stress, Ollie recommends something which might be a little controversial for the hospitality industry.
Alcohol's the greatest trick, unfortunately, and I know hospitality is not going to like this, but alcohol drops my shoulders, releases my frontal lobe, makes me a slightly funnier, better version of myself temporarily, but it kills sleep. It kills sleep. It helps me fall asleep, drives sleep latency, but it fragments sleep and kills deep sleep. Deep sleep is energy restoration. So deep sleep is when in the first sort of 3-4 hours of the night, I go into this what we call slow wave sleep, where I process trauma, I rebuild tissue, I regulate my immune system, I develop memory, and alcohol just kills it. And there's no other way to call it. And people used to, when they come for the health screen, they'd be like, oh, check my liver function because I drink a lot of booze and I want to make sure my liver's not going to explode. And my body composition, how much body fat have I got? Because I know calories in alcohol can build up quite quickly. I'll be like, wait till I show you your sleep on a night you drink versus a night you don't. And wait until you recognize what the implication of inadequate energy restoration is on your behaviors, your mood, your performance the following day. So in almost all situations, I would look at managing midweek alcohol. I would have you on low intensity cardio. I'd have you sharing. I'd have you in nature. I would have you delegating. And unequivocally, I will improve your energy in a relatively small period of time.
Let's prep. Let's go.
Heard, chef.
Chef Heard.
I got this.
You've worked specifically with chefs, you've assessed chefs, you've collected data from chefs. Let's talk a little bit about that. What made you do that? How does that look? What data and how are you collecting that data and what have you learned from it?
Yeah, so I've had chefs in my life from a multitude of different angles. I had the luxury of looking after some world famous chefs on an individual basis. It's a very difficult job in which to be well. So what are the challenges of that job on human physiology? The working pattern, just the sequence of hours, just the sheer volume of time you spend in the kitchen, and that being out of kilter with most other people's working pattern is a challenge. That environment, we thrive on natural light and we thrive on darkness, running in a fairly consistent pattern that allows the cells of our body to get into a rhythm that we call the circadian rhythm, which is the 24-hour clock that's built into every cell of your body meaningfully. So what we got is someone who's got regular working hours with very little access normally to natural light and late night access to bright lights in an environment where there's perpetual noise and there's perpetual heat. Intertwined with that is often tasting. So the difficulty in having deliberate, condensed pockets of time to sit and eat versus continually partially fueling all the way through the day. So what is the impact of tasting on digestion? What is the impact of that pattern of frequency? The environment being particularly prone to alcohol, particularly at the end of shift, being culturally embedded into the practice to have a drink together as a team, understandably. End of each service is not far off a football team at the end of a match. Those are some of the standard things that challenge physiology, because your body doesn't know what a chef is. It just knows I'm not getting light, I'm not getting dark, I'm continually exposed to noise, continually exposed to heat, I'm not eating properly, I'm active but I'm not exercising, so I'm exhausted, on my feet all day, therefore I'm disenfranchised or disengaged from doing formal exercise outside of that. Those are challenges. Benefits, you produce something, meaningful. There's purpose in terms of you can see what you've produced, you hear feedback from that fairly quickly. So that's a positive. You work in a team dynamic, so you work closely, collaboratively with other human beings, you connect with them, and you're normally fulfilling some form of passion. So just to offset, there's a very strong cost-benefit analysis here. But the physical environment is very difficult to be well in. So you have to work deliberately harder to compensate for some of those challenges. So the reality is the path of least resistance, as in if you do not deliberately strategize, you will gain weight in that environment, you will sleep poorly from that environment, you will be continually alert and switched on, and you'll be exhausted.
And didn't you actually wire some chefs up to teach you all about this?
I've recently filmed a TV documentary, measured the physiology of stress in a working chef. So what I do is I put a 2-lead chest monitor on someone, and I physically look over each 24-hour cycle, how often their body was ready for that threat and how often their body's ready to recover. And I put that on a chef, and I see exactly what I expect to see, which is during working hours, there is no time where the body is not waiting for a threat. The nature of service has that individual continually ready for threat. And that person is hoping that either sleep or weekends or their version of Mondays or etc. are going to bring enough energy restoration to offset the pattern of behavior through the rest of the week. And spoiler alert, you might be able to do that in your early 20s or late 20s, but that reserve of physiological energy does not hold true after your body has reached mid-30s, where your physiology basically drops off a cliff. So the pattern we see on that documentary is the pattern I saw when I measured chefs in real life. They do not get any physiological recovery in waking hours. Sleep is disturbed post-shift from the adrenalized state that they can't decompress from the combination of alcohol, from potential late or misuse of caffeine, from the absence of darkness, from the perpetual noise. There's very little reason why their physiology would decompress, because it thinks you're in the middle of a battlefield and you haven't told it you're not. So the data is very much what you would expect.
It was fascinating. You mentioned that there's actually only 3 real drivers of stress: heat, noise, and load, I think you said.
Yeah.
I think all of those exist in kitchens, all 3 of them at the same time.
Yep.
You mentioned adrenaline. I think this is a crux of a problem for chefs, is they're not getting enough sleep. As you mentioned, we know that's where that great recovery, that depth of sleep is really important, as you've told me. And they believe that the best way to do that, to come down off the adrenaline of a shift, is to drink often, because they think that that's going to allow them to get to sleep quicker.
Yeah.
What should they be doing? How should you be expending that adrenaline quick enough that you can get to sleep? Because most are not leaving till 12 o'clock at night, and they're already in a difficult, even just for the amount of time they're going to get to sleep, they're already in a difficult position.
Yeah.
What advice could you offer to chefs in managing that?
It's a tough one. You've got to say, from a sleep routine perspective, I don't want to try and fall asleep too quickly. Because if you ever try to put a child to bed too quickly when they're not tired, they don't sleep well. You've got to build that ability to decompress and recover. So sometimes you push sleep back an hour to allow a greater series of behaviors that mean the 6.5 hours you get is quality versus 7.5 hours of junk. What do we need in that scenario? We need to very quickly, chemically, physically let the body know it's not on the battlefield. So air and the environment is the most powerful way of doing that. So let's imagine we took Utopia, we finished the shift, we've joined it. There's a social piece to this. You might have a low and no alcohol alternative to join in. There's a camaraderie piece, the breaking of bread and all those elements. So what we don't want to do is turn our back on a key part of the team dynamic, which is a major plus point here. So just saying, oh, miss the drinks. I get that may not happen, but finding a way that can be non-alcohol would be definitely a part of the strategy. Then it would be a low intensity bit of activity in nature. So you might go for a 10, 15-minute walk, or can you get park further away, or just, again, be out because I'm knackered by that point. You have to convince your body that the threat is gone. And at that point, again, if we took absolute ideal, you would go for a 20-minute walk before you got home. When you arrived home, if you had, again, the dream, you would be able to do 5 minutes meditation, so a bit of breath work. Then you would shower and change, and I'd probably use even something like a lavender-based shower gel in the evening and a citrus one in the morning to show my body I'm not there now, right? And aromatherapy works by telling, it's our most powerful memory is our smell. And then I would try and do something playful. I wouldn't watch someone getting murdered on Netflix. I wouldn't watch someone, so comedy is good. If you have to watch TV and that's decompression, that's not a disaster. Small screen is not good. So I want as much removal of technology as possible. If I need to do some work, I'll get home and do that, 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, clear that out, then box it off. But what you can't be doing is bringing your iPhone, your laptop, your iPad into the bedroom without having decompressed, because your body still thinks it's on a battlefield even as it closes its eyes and passes out. So it's no alcohol, it's air exposure and light physical activity. It's a change of clothing, state, smell, scent. It might be writing down all the things that you've got to do tomorrow, so you're boxing them off, or all the things that bothered you. So that's why journaling, this sort of, again, feels very feminine concept, but it's extremely powerful for men to write down things that bothered me today, things I've got to do tomorrow. So do you know what I'm not going to do? I'm not going to dream about those things. I'm not going to stay thinking about that. So just scribble a little scribble pad, and that's a trick, because there is stuff, but you've got to use those tools if you want to decompress effectively. There's more, but those would be the good starting point, I think, Ryan.
Just thinking about heat, now you've mentioned it, how big of an impact would that have if you could make a kitchen colder? Because obviously there's technology, AC, there's ways in which you could actually work around that. Would that have a great impact on your staff if you were to reduce the temperature of the room they were working in when they were in the kitchen?
It could. I don't know if anyone's trialed it, but certainly in the later hours, so for my body to work properly, as I move into dusk and darkness, I would need my core temperature to drop. So the inside of me needs to drop by about a degree. If you do that too early, then you might induce sleepiness. So you just got to find the right balance, that you need these people to be on it until they finish the shift. So I think rapid cooling would be a more logical strategy, as in I get out into the fresh air. Can I get into a cool shower? Can I air dry? Can I wear really nice cotton breathable pajamas? Stuff that seems relatively simple, but just isn't executed that consistently. And that would be more important than having the last 4 hours of your shift in a really cool environment. I would be fairly confident that if you cooled that kitchen a little bit, you would see an improvement in physiology, but it's hearsay rather than evidence-based.
Be fascinating to study that now
really
and understand what would be the
sweet spot.
I'm also now wondering about lighting, and is there an alternative to this synthetic lighting that's having an impact? What would be the alternative there?
And lighting's a really good one. So we have this phrase coming in called circadian lighting, which basically has a greater volume of the blue light frequencies in the morning, which is part of invigorating and waking us up, and then a greater infusion of red light in the evening, which, red light ultimately leads towards darkness. So you can have light bulbs that almost change throughout the duration. The challenge here again is alertness versus well-being. So I don't want someone coming into a state of physiological calm in the most important service of the day for my restaurant. I want them sharp from pillar to post.
And it's dangerous if they're not sharp. This is there's sharp knives, it's hot, there's burns.
Yeah.
The kitchen's a dangerous environment, which I guess also adds to that constant state of expecting something to happen.
Spot on. And so I don't know what the response time difference would be, what the cognitive sharpness would be, because that needs to be mediated against the performance of that particular environment. So this is exploratory areas and really exciting to hear people would think about it. Noise is a good one. Unnecessary latent noise would be a brilliant thing, and where is the noise coming from? Where can I take something that generates noise and kill it? Could we move something to a headset based communication strategy where I can talk calmly, clearly, rather than shouting and being shouted at? Can tech play a role in that? Does that remove some of the human connection? Everything's got a yin and a yang to it. Yeah, but I think that the key thing to focus on is recognizing that once you've finished that shift, so let's imagine the shift is what it is, how you can then bring cool, dark, calm, humor, play, nature, scent as aggressively as possible, as deliberately as possible, because it's not your place of work's job to decompress you, it's your job. The onus here is on the individual to take these behaviors and they own them, rather than sitting around and waiting for the whole industry to save them.
And I do know a chef who just installed a soundproof booth in the restaurant.
Love.
To
For
allow
diners,
the chefs,
for the chefs,
not
just
to
to
allow
do-
the chefs to go in and just have 15 minutes of calm and tranquility in proper silence.
Genius.
He hit rock bottom. I mean, he's a famous case of his central nervous system started to attack himself.
Yeah. Yes.
Started to impact his sight. Yeah, he couldn't see correctly, and he went through like 2 years of really intense recovery. Stepped away from the group, came back and reopened a new restaurant group. And one of the first things he installed was this soundproof booth. And I'm wondering if just giving your staff that space just for a 15-minute respite, how valuable that could be.
I love that. And I remember years ago, I did a sort of look at the stress levels of a group of individuals who were in the civil service, and loads of them smoked. This was before smartphones, interestingly. So loads of them smoked. And when we looked at the stress, we found actually better recovery levels in the smokers than the non-smokers. And that was odd because in smoking, there's nicotine, which is a stimulant. Forgetting all the health detriments of smoking, they were more relaxed. And we're like, well, that's fair, isn't it? Every hour they go outside and they hang out and they talk and they decompress. They change their environment. They get up from their desk. And these micro breaks, which again, the humans have this sort of smaller rhythms called ultradian rhythms, about 90 minutes long. And we shouldn't necessarily be blocked for 3 hours, 4 hours in the same setting without that decompression. So if you had a sort of a decompression chamber that you went to every 2 hours for 10 minutes or every hour for 5 minutes, and that caused movement, change of state, change of mindset, introspection, what we'll definitely find there is better sleep. So I think having that ability built into your operating rhythm for little decompressions, for a bit of fresh air, for a bit of nature, for a bit of movement would be a very much a structural thing that organizations should be thinking about above and beyond the accountability of the individual.
I could have spoken with Ollie all day, if only just to get some advice on my growing list of hypochondria-driven ailments. There are so many exciting ideas here, but given all the challenges that chefs face, there are some big mountains to climb, especially when it comes to clawing back some well-being for yourself when you work in this high-stress environment like a professional kitchen. But I love that there's lots to be optimistic about here too. You can take control of this stuff, but you have to be consistent.
You can't nourish yourself in 2 days. You can't get fit over a weekend. So you need to be doing tomorrow what you're doing in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. So habits you can adhere to that allow you to thrive in this space are fundamental. And I've seen people do that and do it extremely well.
The thing is, chefs are great at routine. They're great at forming habits. They're great at checklists. It's their everyday life. So it's just applying those skills to keeping the pantry loaded and making sure all the food goes out on time to caring for themselves. And I always say, I find it so upsetting that we have this great, passionate, creative group of people that spend more time caring about the sustainability of the carrot they're cooking than themselves.
And that is a brilliant piece to pick on. Treat yourself with the same care and attention as your ingredients, your customers. Comes back to almost our first point, Ryan, self-compassion. Self-compassion isn't a hot bath and a bath bomb and a massage. It's the sum of daily behaviors where you've put yourself equally to others, maybe a little bit ahead of. And those rituals and those habits will reap reward 10 times the value of the time spent investing in them. And that's a conservative estimate.
It's clear that Ollie's a massive advocate of taking responsibility for your own health and doing what you can to protect yourself against the stresses and strains of the kitchen. And he's given us all a simple blueprint to try follow. There's so many things you can work on step by step each day, and some fascinating ideas for you, employers, to implement in your restaurants. Here's a few final words of wisdom from what is a very wise man.
There's that old phrase, sooner or later you need to make time for wellness or you'll be forced to make time for illness. You can be an extremely well chef, you can work in a kitchen for a long, prosperous career, but not as the path of least resistance. So the earlier you start, the bigger the win.
You've been listening to Heard, the podcast that aims to put the rest in restaurants. Herd was hosted and produced by me, Ryan King, and produced by Helen Brown. Next time on Herd, JJ Johnson, the chef founder of Field Trip, asked for it, so JJ gets it.
I hope that I can employ somebody that my team can go to and sit on the couch like Billions, because these corporate offices have it for these guys that lose money, like trade money.
You're going to hear from a performance coach called Dr. Julie Gerner. Julie works with people who are operating in environments that are not so different to the kitchens you're working in today.
You kind of are always on the clock. You're always trying to manage how much money is left in the bank. You're always trying to manage the product being out in the market, getting traction, having good product market fit.
So how can performance coaching help you if it's applied to the kitchen?
It's like lightning in your veins when you have something that's operating like a well-oiled machine.
Herd will be back soon talking to more experts who can help the culinary community with new ideas, mentorship, motivation, and different perspectives on kitchen culture issues that together we can start to fix. This episode of Herd has been sponsored by San Pellegrino and Accor, two brands that care passionately about the restaurant industry. Remember, if you need any mental health support or you just want to sit down and have a chat with somebody about any of the issues we discuss in this series, please visit southernsmoke.org, a great 501c3 that runs free mental health programs for people who work in the US restaurant industry. Please remember to follow, rate, and share to spread the word about Herd.